In life, when we encounter something that we don't like, we have a few options. A very popular option for people to take seems to be to complain. Another popular option is to ignore it, to go your own way, to leave it behind, have nothing to do with it. Some few choose to make their own version, to do it better. Some join forces with the people who produced the thing that was not liked to try and improve it. These are the options that we are presented with. Some of them are more productive than others. Recently, whether we agree or not, whether we want to participate or not, those of us who love role-playing games and talk about them or read about them online have been witness to or participants in an argument. I believe the intent truly was for there to be a conversation, but the result, the predictable result, has been an argument, and passions have flared. And as is the case when passions flare and an argument is happening, there have been those who have shifted from arguing to achieve resolution to arguing to win. And that serves no one's purpose. What the argument has been about is a small slice of what around here we semi-laughingly call the Holy Trinity of role-playing game advice. And that small slice is the part that talks about talking with the players. Why do we need to talk with the players? Well, sometimes the game doesn't go well. And so you need to talk with the players to find out what it is that the group, the whole group, can do to make sure that future sessions are enjoyable, that future sessions meet whatever goals it is that the group has. Talk with the players. Ideally, our conversation with the players, ideally, could be a preventative measure. But really, in the real world, we are often faced with repairing a situation, solving a problem. We're not telepaths, we're not mind readers, we're not prognosticators. We can't predict and gain insight into each person at the table, no matter how well we know them, to predict everything which will arise. Over time, we get better and better at it. And many of us can probably say, not that it proves anything, but that doesn't make it any less true. Many of us can probably say that I've never had to deal with anything that we couldn't handle. It's likely as true, and again, conclusive of as little, that many of us can raise our hands and say, I have had to deal with problems that the group couldn't handle. Human interaction puts us in a position where we have the ability to put things into the shared experience, which will have an effect on the people around us. What we do affects others, be that physical or social. We have the capacity to cause a reaction, to invite a reaction. On the other side of that coin, as adults, we have the ability to learn how to control our reactions. We have the choice of how we will respond. We have our instinctive response, and we have our learned behaviors. in a state of mental and physical health, we have control, and with control comes responsibility. As actors or as reactors, we have a responsibility to ourselves and the way that we choose to live, and to the group and how we have chosen to participate. As a result, when we are told that we are acting badly, there is an onus on the person doing the telling to support their claim. And there's an onus on the person being told to listen and evaluate and respond intelligently, and again with support in reply if that is needed. This is adult discourse. I think for many of us, certainly anybody watching this channel, role-playing games are one of those things about which we have a lot of passion. And in the presence of passion, we can expect our capacity for reason to diminish. Emotions, while maybe not essential to remove for a crystal clear logic, emotions certainly interfere with and open the door for things which affect our capacity to be purely fair. And we can shift from being in an argument and trying to find out what the truth is to being in an argument and simply wanting to be right, to demonstrate that we are correct. But when we think about adult discourse, we also need to think about who are the adults engaged in it. When we think about role-playing as a whole, we have to remember that a lot of its participants are kids in various stages of development, and they play with or without the supervision or participation of their parents. We both are and are not their role models in role-playing. The games themselves have a significant impact on the way that they behave, and the way those games are written by us, the people of our generation, and the generation which came before us. Those games speak to them directly about role-playing in ways maybe we don't, or maybe not all of us do. Who are the adults in the conversation? Who are the adults providing this model? If those adults are not capable of holding fair and considered discourse, then how are the younger generations to follow ever going to be expected to learn it? If we do not show them, if we do not teach them, how will they learn it? And that's a big part of this argument as well. Playing well, playing right. Who's right? Who's going to win the argument? And so we have to consider that maybe the loudest voices in this argument are the people who have been harmed. But we also have to consider that maybe the loudest voices in this argument are not the people who have been harmed. Maybe they are silent, and maybe people are arguing on their behalf because they have difficulties which prevent them from coming forward. And then we have to remember that for some small number of participants in this hobby is their business. There are people among us who have made our hobby their business. And what role are they playing in this argument? Because they are arguing for reasons of commerce. They are arguing to protect business. And they are participating in the hobby from the business standpoint, meaning where do they play and with whom do they play? How much of their gaming life is that home group at home? And how much is convention play, and how much is play with strangers, and how much does that color their perception of what is needed and necessary in the hobby, what the hobby even is? Now, if you heard all of that as an attack or as a criticism, I ask you to please consider that as simply a question, because that's all it was. It was questions. How much? Who? How often? Questions for critical thinking, for assessment of my own opinion and of what is being told to me by others. We must open our minds to questions and seek proof, or we are not participating in adult discourse and we are not having a conversation. We're having an argument. We've wound up in an argument. What are we arguing about? Well, it turns out that we're arguing about consent. I have to ask, why? Why are we arguing about consent? What is consent? Consent is granting permission to someone else to do something, maybe to you or to someone over whom you have responsibility, such as a parent and child relationship. You grant consent for a doctor to operate or for a school to take them on a field trip, something like that. Consent, granting of permission to someone else. You always have the ability to revoke your permission, especially if the situation changes. This is consent. When we grant legal consent to use our likeness or use an IP, sometimes the contracts we write end up putting us in uncomfortable situations. But that is the law, and that is legality, and that is commerce, and that is separate from what we're talking about here today, which is a hobby, the role-playing game hobby, where we sit down together as a group to play a game. Now let's take a look at that. We choose to join or not join the group. The group chooses to play or not play a game. The group chooses to play or not play the pitch presented for this game this time. So in other words, we agree to play Star Wars or Blue Planet or A Time of War or Heroes Unlimited or whatever, Hollow Earth Expedition. And we listen to the campaign pitch or the one-shot pitch. If we're not having those kinds of conversations, why not? Ask yourself, why not? Why aren't we, in this particular moment, with this particular group, in this particular game, why aren't we discussing a simple teaser to get people excited? Maybe we are and we're not aware of it. Oh, I've got some ideas for you. You guys are never going to figure this one out, or something along those lines. Maybe we are signaling all the information that we need to know, but we've reached that process of communicating with the group in a more evolutionary process rather than a learned or chosen process. Talking with the players could be, in some contexts, about consent. But on a more fundamental level, the conversation isn't about consent, it's about consensus. What do we want to do? People say that there are bad actors out there, and in all walks of life we can find them. Whatever activity we choose to do, we will find people who are enjoyable to do it with, and there are people that you wish weren't a part of it. There are a lot of reasons for that. Simple taste or ability in competitive situations. But relevant to this conversation, we have conscience. Does the person act in good conscience? Conscience is the thing with which we evaluate what we are about to do and evaluate what we have already done to determine if we accept it in ourselves. Did I act correctly? Did I act in the way that I would choose to act? Or did I act outside the bounds of control, and do I now owe reparations or apologies? Do I have to make it right, or have I acted rightly? The group is also involved in conscience. The group has a conscience about what it does together as a group and in monitoring from the outside what individual members do, holding people to a standard that they know that they hold for themselves in moments where they have lost control. Conscience. I want you to consider what we are talking about. We're talking about playing a game. We could be playing something that's purely fun, something like Tune, something that's difficult to connect to the realities of real life, like some kind of spy game like James Bond, or some high fantasy game where not even death is an actual barrier to continuing to play. We could be talking about games like that, or we could be talking about games about truly dark themes. We could be talking about games which put us in situation, or environments which put us in situations which seem to us, or may actually be, in the case of some form of live action role play, actually dangerous. Many of the people that we play with in our lives might be said to be free of actual trauma. Some of the people that we play with might not be free of trauma, and we might be aware of it or unaware of it. By being a group that finds consensus, by being a group that acts with good conscience, do we really need to go so far as consent? And I think this has been the heart of the problem. One side of the argument is hearing, you need to get consent, or you are not playing right, you're being insensitive, you're being a bad person. And the other side can't imagine why people wouldn't want to make sure that everybody in their group is cared for. They're not having the same conversation. They're not having a conversation at all. And the reason why is because the whole event these days has been framed in the context of consent. One tool for one context. What is the context of our gaming? Do you imagine a theater and a stage and watching people play a role-playing game? Do you imagine sitting at home watching a streamed game? Is that role-playing to you? Is that the largest single source of role-playing enjoyment in your life right now? Do you imagine going to a convention and being a part of a group, but a group of strangers in the midst of, in a sea of other groups composed of strangers, everyone playing different games, everyone talking at the same time, paying attention yet ignoring each other in a convention? Or do you picture your friendly local game store and showing up for game night and wondering who will be there? Some friends, some new, some young, some old, some experienced, some not. Or do you picture, as the common denominator, the foundation in your experience of role-playing being in the home, or at least a virtual representation of the home through some kind of video conferencing, the home game where you play regularly with the same people, maybe different games, but with the same people. In some of these contexts, consent is going to be a front line of defense. But in others, it may never, ever be needed, providing the group acts with common courtesy. In other words, acts with conscience. So we have many words in this video starting with con: conscience, consensus, consent, convention. Conventions of play, considerations of other people. There has been an argument. Fingers have been pointed. If you don't like this, you are part of the problem, has been stated baldly. Right? If you can't see that there's a problem, you're not thinking, has been said in reply. Why would anybody want to listen to that kind of interaction? It's action, not interaction. The intention isn't for discussion or conversation. The intention is to win the argument. So as an example, let's take a look at the most recent thing in this war. And this is not a new thing. Tools have been available to help people navigate challenging subjects, either when there is the presence of trauma in the group or when the group is in a healthy fashion exploring something that's actually risque, culturally or socially or experientially, right? Morally, ethically. These tools have been around for a long time. What has caused this conversation to flare up in this way right now? Well, of course, we have greater access to a growing number of strong opinions through things like Twitter and YouTube and Facebook. But most recently, Monte Cook Games has released a free PDF about consent in role-playing games. It frames the discussion in terms of consent and frames the discussion in terms of needing to gain consent to play responsibly. Now, on both sides, people are saying that this document was meant in good faith. Maybe it was. But there are some questions to ask. Who wrote it? Why were those people chosen to write it? Why is it free? On what day was it released, and is that at all relevant? Why, for a document that claims to be system neutral, does it advertise the cipher system on every interior page? Why are all the quotes from sources from a Monte Cook Games game mastering resource? Is this some form of quick start to direct our attention at the real material? If you like this, try this one that we're not giving away for free. There are questions to ask. It doesn't mean that there was any wrongdoing. It means that you're looking with attention at the document. It turns out that the document was released a few days before the end of a Kickstarter. It turns out that one of the authors is one of the authors involved in that Kickstarter. It turns out that Consent is an area that author feels very strongly about, not necessarily in the context of role-playing games. So it's very likely that this product is meant with good intentions. It's also possible that this product was used for promotion. Things to consider. This document at the end has a long list of other resources you might be interested in. Each of those resources is well established, old, they've been available for a long time. They haven't had this kind of high-profile introduction to a wide group of gamers of differing backgrounds, ages, experience, demographics, and so on and so forth. I think we should be really happy that these tools have been made so widely available. But again, I have to ask, couldn't we have been made happier with having those tools, which are available for free, published for free by Monte Cook Games with all the attributions assigned? Not advertising Cipher System, but advertising these are tools that you can use to solve problems which you may or may not experience. These are tried and tested tools. This is the tool. This is the problem to which it should be applied. This is the outcome which should be expected. This is the manner in which to apply it. Then the conversation can be about the tools. Then the conversation can be about, I tried to use it and failed, please help. I tried to use it, it was successful, here's how. The conversation can actually be about the topic, instead of whether or not we need consent. And sadly, this particular document and many conversations on this topic fail to present any kind of case about why it needs to go that far along the spectrum of action to consent as a first step. Surely the first step is to be a conscientious participant in the activity, a member of the group who acts in good conscience. Surely in a group activity, seeking consensus is a sensible second step, and to do so in good faith, in good conscience. And then, if through this process we recognize that there could be or will be problems, such as the presence of real trauma, such as a convention, a public gaming situation with strangers, such as a cultural or other discordant mismatch element within the group that people want to get over, then we need to bring in the tool of consent. We have the foundational, we have the building block attitude and approach to play, conscience, and finding consensus. And then when there are problems, you say, hey, I don't think we can go forward with this unless we establish exactly what we are comfortable with. And now we're talking about consent. Right? I want to be open-minded to the desires of the groups to explore this topic, but I'm really uncomfortable with it, and I need to not feel like I'm going to be a part of the problem, and I need to feel like I shouldn't recuse myself from participation. I want to participate, but I'm not sure that this will be an experience that I enjoy. So please, can we talk about some way of handling it? And in the presence of actual trauma, of course, we need to have preparation inside the group to handle those eventualities that are linked to that trauma. We are not therapists. We are not mental or physical health professionals, unless we are. All we are talking about is finding ways to push boundaries, explore new things, play games, and have fun together on equal ground, on equal footing. Yeah, that's all. So this never should have reached the point of argument at all. But somehow, we always seem to find a way.